I can see that being a Concorde captain, you had access to luminaries from a wide circle, but being given access to a box in Carnegie Hall must have been a great benefit. What did you like seeing there?
Concerts.
Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the most memorable one I went to was Otto Klemperer conducting Beethoven's Ninth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which was pretty special.
But did you manage to get any other side benefits?
No, not, I mean, to me, I like music, and those classical musicians were a very special breed. In my view, they were all geniuses. They're on a totally different plane from the rest of us. They don't have to compete with anybody because they're above competition. And they were all, without exception, fascinated by the operation of an aeroplane. Oh. And of course, we had open flight deck doors. I used to invite them up for come and watch takeoffs, come and watch landings. They'd sit up there during the cruise. I mean, it was a totally different world, wasn't it?
It was, indeed.
And a much more pleasurable world. And, you know, they were fascinated by it. And, I mean, Vladimir Ashkenazy, for instance, I flew him many times. He was like a Roman emperor, this sort of aquiline face, fantastic looking chap. And I remember on one flight I did with him, he asked me for my address. And I gave him my address and thought no more about it. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, a jiffy bag arrives from Geneva, Switzerland, and it contained 2 long-playing records, one of him conducting, one of him playing, and on the record sleeves, you can tell how long ago it was, record sleeves, he'd written to John Hutchinson with many thanks for many memorable Concorde flights. And when I looked at the writing on the record sleeve, it was the same writing as on the jiffy bag. So he
parcelled them up himself.
Ashkenazy had parcelled these up himself and taken them down to Geneva post office and posted them to me.
Very nice. What a lovely man.
Which is pretty special.
Excellent, yeah. I read with great interest about your conversation with the BBC from Concorde as you flew over St Athens Air Show. Now, I was just curious on the technical aspects. How did you achieve that? Was it an HF foam patch or something similar?
No, it was VHF.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
So you had to speak quite quickly.
Yeah.
Because you were going to be out of range pretty soon.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you the story then. So, because this is how I actually basically got into working with the BBC. I'd been asked by British Airways a couple of days before the flight, you know, would you mind doing a little piece for the BBC as I flew past St Athan? I said, yeah, sure, of course I will. And I thought, well, there's no point in going overhead at 28,000 feet because they won't see the aeroplane. So I had a word with the air traffic controllers and said, this is what I'd like to do. I'll climb up initially to 28,000 feet, and then as we're getting towards St Athan, I'd like to descend under radar control down to 6,000 feet. And if you can guide me over St Athan. So that's exactly what I did. This is a scheduled flight with passengers going to New York on business trips. And we go right over St Athan, and I called up, BBC St Athan, this is Speedbird Concorde 001, do you read? And it was Raymond Baxter on the other and said, Speedbird 001, this is BBC St Athan, I read you loud and clear. Go ahead with your message. And I then did a spiel as we flew over St Athan along the lines that we owed the freedom of the skies that we enjoy today to those brave people who laid down their lives in the Battle of Britain. And I hope you all have a wonderful Battle of Britain air show. And now I must get on my way to New York and open the throttles up and zoomed away, and we carried on to New York. And when I got back, Sue said, there's a chap called Dougie Hesp who's been trying to get hold of you from the BBC. So I said, "Oh, really? What's his number?" And she gave it to me. And I rang him up, and he said, "Oh," he said, "you've got a great voice for broadcasting." He said, "Very distinctive." He said, "I want you to come up here and we'll do some tests because we'd like to use you as a sort of as a commentator for air shows." So I went up and did these tests and passed, and then I negotiated with British Airways, who were delighted because now they had a Concorde captain presenting programs for the BBC. So it was great sort of promotion for British Airways. So it was a sort of win-win situation. And I had a wonderful time with the BBC, going to all these different air shows, Mildenhall, Biggin Hill, Fairford, all sorts of things. And as a result of that, of course, I got one of my more memorable flights in my logbook, a flight in a Harrier.
Oh, marvellous. Yes.
So that was fun.
Who was the pilot?
It was a chap called...
I put you on the spot, I'm sorry.
You have...
Air Force chap or a test pilot?
No, he's an Air Force chap. Yeah. I can't remember his name. It's in my logbook.
Oh, well, we'll...
It's in my logbook.
Yeah, we'll look for posterity, perhaps. Excellent. Now, part of this was you jumping out of an airplane while doing commentary. I was a bit taken aback that you broke the golden rule of all right-minded pilots jumping out of a serviceable airplane, but what was it like?
Bloody stupid thing to do. What people do just to feature on television.
I gather it went very well, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, I tell you what, the instruction I had, it was at Weston-on-the-Green with the guys who train the special forces. You don't get better instruction than that. And they're checking you every inch of the way, constantly telling you things and then questioning you to make sure that you've taken aboard what it was they just told you. And having done all the sort of ground training, we then went up in this Islander up to 12,000 feet, I think it was. And I jumped out doing what's called accelerated freefall.
Oh, wow.
Where you jump out with a chap on each elbow. So I went out, there were 3 RAF jumpers, one with a camera and the other 2, one on each arm. And we go into the free fall position with them hanging onto my arms just to stabilize me. And at one stage I remember the guy with the camera was filming me. I could sort of looking at him straight on like this, and I started waving to the camera. I thought that'd be clever. And I promptly, of course, because I was no longer in the proper free fall position, I got myself completely unstable. And these 2 chaps had to grab me tight and get me locked back into the free fall
Aerodynamics,
position.
John, how could you have forgotten?
And at 4,000 feet, I then pulled the ripcord, and that was fantastic. It was a square parachute. It was an aerofoil, a rectangular parachute, I should say, rather than a mushroom-shaped parachute. And it's a glider. And I was completely at home.
I love
and
it.
The contrast between the dynamic experience of free fall and gliding along under this wing was quite dramatic, actually. And I was just in 7th heaven now, and I was doing sort of stalls and turns, and of course what you actually do is you come in downwind, base leg, final approach, and I landed
Excellent.
right on the edge of the landing spot, and they were all frightfully impressed. I said, well, I'm a pilot, I ought to be able to judge glide angles. It would have been pretty rum-do if I had missed the landing spot completely.
I know plenty of pilots that have missed. Brilliant. I see you started a company, Flying Concorde charters for car salesmen. I'm joking, of course, but these charters and others you mentioned sort of tells me that the aircraft's utilization rate for scheduled flights wasn't very high and that you were having to dream up new ways of using it. Was that really the beginning of the writing on the wall for the Concorde fleet?
That was the beginning of really getting the aeroplane accepted for charter flying. I mean, British Airways didn't want to charter the airplane at all.
Oh, really?
Start with. No, they thought it was all going to be far too complicated to do that. Let's just stick to our scheduled destinations and leave it at that. And it was people like me with this charter club, as we called it. A group of us had got together. A chap called Jock Lowe that I've already mentioned, Mick Burke, a flight engineer called Bill Brown, and myself did that. And then eventually this led the way to a company called Goodwood Travel coming on the scene, and they had the resources and the expertise to make a far better job of what we essentially did was to prove that charters could work.
Mm-hmm.
And British Airways now realised that charters could work, and that then enabled people like Goodwood Travel and others to come on the scene and do it on a much more professional basis than we were ever able to do. So that was I think the first Concorde charter ever was organised by a chap called Brian Calvert, who's a very eminent captain on Concorde, who had been one of the nucleus group of pilots that were seconded to British Aerospace before the airplane ever entered service.
Oh, wow.
And did their training with Brown Trubshaw and John Cochrane and people. And he organised a Concorde charter for his pub.
I love it.
At Allsworth in Berkshire. And that was the very first charter that was ever done, I think. And that sort of opened a crack in the door, which we sort of exploited, and eventually, the charter side of things became almost as important as the schedule side of things, because what it did was, well, various things. It enabled us, the taxpayer, to go on Concorde at an affordable price, and B, the publicity that it got going to all these different destinations was enormous positive publicity for British Airways. So it became a very, very successful part of the whole Concorde operation.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. Something that I took from another interview I listened to, that of David Davis, the Air Registration Board test pilot.
Yep.
He said that the initial design for Concorde was, when the nose was up, the windshield would be covered by a solid metal visor. Now, he said that he and the Air Registration Board would have been happy to certify the aircraft in that design, but it was the American FAA that insisted on having glass that they could see through even when the nose was fully up. How would you have felt flying inside a metal box with steel shutters over the windshield?
No, I think David Davis was wrong in his thinking about that.
Okay.
I really do. And that clear glass, that visor that you could look through, did have value. I mean, I remember on one occasion we were flying to New York, and it was south of Gander somewhere, and I saw this white ball in the sky. I have to say that there was little I could have done about it, because by the time I'd sort of registered this white ball in the sky, the next thing was it was whizzing past off our right wing somewhere, about a mile away to the right-hand side. And it was a meteorological balloon.
Oh, wow.
with all of its box of tricks hanging underneath. I don't know what would have happened if it had been directly on course.
Well, they're supposed to be frangible, but when you're doing Mach 2...
Yeah, well, I don't know whether the shockwave would have blasted the thing out of the way. Might have done.
But you wouldn't really want one to go down an engine, would you?
No, no, you would not. Absolutely not. So, you know, I was able to see that. I would never even seen it if it had been a solid visor.
But it was a marvellous testament to the technology that they managed to eventually create glass that was capable of withstanding
It was
the temperatures and the pressures.
Fantastic
and the speed.
glass, yes. Absolutely. Made by Triplex, I believe.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, did a good job.